Welcome to session 2 in our 3-part series on facing reality, embracing grief, and walking in hope. If you've not had an opportunity to watch the first video on facing reality, it is a necessary step to really be able to do the work that's a part of embracing grief well. So I'd encourage you to go back and check out that video and then come back to this so that you can walk towards a living hope. But that in this particular video, we're going to be dealing with the need of embracing grief. That as we have been confronted with the reality of the situation of tragedy or crisis in front of us, that we then don't ignore it, we don't deny it, we don't do those things, but rather we embrace the grief. We're walking on a journey with a psalmist. He's a guy who wrote poetry. His name is Asaph, and he had a crisis that he was walking through. And while we don't know all of the specific details of what that crisis was, we do get privileged insight into how he processed the tragedy and crisis that he was walking through. So in Psalm 77, we're going to be specifically looking at verses 3 through 10 together. So let's take a look at it. It says this: I think of God and I moan. I meditate and my spirit faints. You keep my eyelids from closing. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old and remember the years of long ago. I commune with my heart in the night. I meditate and search my spirit. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? And his steadfast love ceased forever? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? And I say in my grief that the right hand of the Most High has changed. The first thing that really stands out as we consider how Asaph is expressing how he's processing this crisis is that he has moved to a meditation on the things of God. I think of God, I meditate, but that he lands in a place that seems the opposite of the way it should be. He moans and he finds no comfort for his spirit, but rather his spirit becomes weak and faints. This does seem contradictory to everything that we're taught about what it means to pursue God, particularly in the midst of crisis or tragedy. That we experience tragedy and we're told, seek the Lord, seek God, and that he'll comfort you, he'll meet you in your affliction, he'll take that burden and provide peace in its place. And however, that's not what Asaph experienced. That his initial seeking of God landed him in a place of hurt and grief, a place of moaning, a place of weakness. This lack of comfort leads Asaph to say some very, very hard things for us to hear, some very difficult questions that he's wrestling with. He questions basically the character of God. Where is God's love? Has he forgotten to be gracious to us? Has he forgotten us completely? Has he decided to not show compassion to us any longer? These questions are questions that we must face. We need to be facing the questions of, where is God? Has he left us? Has he ceased to be compassionate towards us or failed to be gracious to us any longer? We must be willing to wrestle with those questions if we're going to have a fully formed hope for the future. And we must wrestle with those questions because they get to the core of who is God. And so I think that we struggle with those questions, but we have to ask them. So for example, in our current coronavirus crisis, where is God for the 34,000 people that have died from this illness? Where is God for the families in the midst of this? Where is God's grace in the midst of all of this? Where's God for the family that's struggling to pay bills because they've been furloughed or have lost their job because of the economy crashing? What is God doing in the midst midst of that. As we wrestle with those questions, the where is God questions, we're going to start to see a picture of who God really is. Now, I do think that we can cut that process short, that we start to wrestle with those questions and we can kind of short circuit the process of those questions. And I think there's two really big ways that we do it. The first one is just a denial of God entirely. This actually has happened with the coronavirus situation. Carl Lentz, the pastor of Hillsong Church in New York City, did contract the COVID-19 virus and has been posting on his various social media platforms and through the church about the seriousness of the disease as well as his recovery. What's been interesting has actually been the way that people have reacted to him. And here's a man of faith that's saying that God can do incredible things, that has been suffering from this illness. And the number of people have responded to him and said, it's a good thing that there's medicine because God has not met you here. God has not saved you here. So it's a good thing that doctors and the medical staff and medical sciences are there to save you. You see, that those responses are just a flat denial of God. It's short-circuiting the question of where is God in the midst of this? It's short-circuiting the question of, wait a minute, why suffering? Where's compassion? Where's grace? The second way we short-circuit this is that we don't allow ourselves to actually wrestle with what God is actually doing. We simply ignore the world around us, which is something we talked about in the Facing Reality video, but that we just ignore things and never allow our preconceived notions of who God is to be challenged by the actual world in which we are living. See, the psalmist doesn't do this. Asaph doesn't allow this. He asks these questions, and he comes to this conclusion in verse 10. I read it already, but he said, "It is my grief that the right hand of the Most High has changed." Asaph is wrestling with the fact that it seems like his perception of who God is has changed. His perception of what God is interested in has changed. His perception of the way that God works in the world is being challenged. And the question for us is, are we willing to allow our preconceived notions of who God is to be challenged, just like Asaph's were challenged? This is the irony. When we cry out in grief, when we ask these hard questions that demonstrate some level of doubt, we are actually demonstrating a deeper faith than if we simply ignored and continued moving forward in our preconceived, happy notions of who God is. When we are willing to face reality and then embrace grief like this, asking those hard questions of where is God? Has He abandoned us? Where is grace? Where is compassion? That it's in that moment that we are open to seeing just how big this God really is. That our small conceptions that we can put in our brains that can fit who this God is, that we're shown that He is significantly larger than that. If you're in the midst of grief that's causing you to question that deeply, and to just sit in that place of almost despair, I want you to know something. It's okay. It's okay to be wrestling with questions of doubt and grief like that. Because in the middle of that crisis, when you press into that feeling and when you continue to seek for that which is true, God will find you there. He will meet you there. If you're a person of faith, that you've been trying to follow God for quite some time, and you've never allowed yourself to really sit on those questions, to really allow yourself to be broken over these incredible tragedies of our world, you need to go there. You need to allow yourself to wrestle with the actual realities of our world and then grieve the loss that is present. And that grief would find itself and show itself, demonstrate itself to you in these questions of doubt. This is the incredible irony, that when we wrestle with these deep questions of doubt that bubble up out of grief, we are actually demonstrating a deeper faith than if we simply turned a blind eye to our circumstances and the reality of our world and simply dressed ourselves up with the mask and clothing of joy and peace and happiness. And it is in that place of deep faith, when we continue to press into those things, seeking for truth, that God will meet you. As you are embracing grief, if you've not already done so, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. So that way, when the next session on Walking in Hope is released, that it is available to you so that you know how to take that next critical step out of grief and into a hopeful future founded upon a solid foundation.